Welcome back to Ask the Educator, a podcast for all professionals involved in medical device processing and sponsored by Healthmark Industries. The education team here at Healthmark has 280 years of combined experience in areas ranging from sterile processing, endoscopy, OR, biomed, to hospital and industry leadership. Our goal is to leverage our collective experience to answer one of your questions each episode, giving you the practical tips you need to succeed in the evolving world of device processing. My name is Kevin Anderson, clinical educator here at Healthmark, and I will be your host. Let's get started. All right, everyone, welcome back to Ask the Educator. So for this episode, we're going to have a special guest, actually. She works tirelessly behind the scenes here at Healthmark. Her name is Audrey McDonald, and she's a laboratory technician here by title. But today, she's actually going to be our educator guest because I think the listeners need to know what she does here at Healthmark. Audrey, it's been a long time in the making, and I'm super happy to finally be doing this episode with you. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you for having me on the podcast today. I'm so excited to be here.
Excellent. I appreciate it. Now, brushes can seem rather simple, and I think that we have all looked at them at some point and thought, you know, a brush is a brush is a brush. What difference does it really make which one we use? Well, at Healthmark, we believe there's more to it than, just grab a brush and go clean instruments. We know that brushing isn't as simple as it sounds. And if you don't believe me, check out the webinar that Sharon Rojo did on the art of brushing. You can find it at hmark.com on our website under the education tab. But today, we're going to add a whole additional layer to brushes, one that I believe most people don't know about. I know I didn't before I worked at Healthmark. So in order to get into it, I think it's important for people to have a little bit of a brief introduction to ASTM. Most of us are going to be familiar with AMI or AORN or even AST to some degree, but ASTM is completely different. So Audrey, would you mind just giving us a brief explanation of ASTM?
Sure, Kevin. So ASTM used to be known as this American Society for Testing and Materials, but now they're streamlined their name. They're just known as ASTM International. This is because it's now this globally recognized organization, basically writing and publishing standards that are driven by the expertise and judgment of members who represent not only the industry, but government, trade groups, and so much more. So unlike AMI, ASTM standards can apply to many various industries. So there's even many common consumer products that have some affiliation with an ASTM standard or specification. Things like a dish detergent or duct tape are just a couple common examples. But one thing important about ASTM standards is that they're recognized for their high quality and market relevance across many industries. So being able to not only recognize and contribute to those standards, but then apply those to testing our products it's wonderful. And it's been a great experience doing that and learning about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Audrey. So I know, and I readily admit, just like I said before, I had no clue about ASTM prior to working with Healthmark, but I believe they're an organization that we should all know at least a little bit about. But our listeners might be wondering, how does it really apply to us in the device processing world? And that's the part I wanted to really get into here. ASTM has a standard, and the name is obviously a little mundane because we have to have, a way of labeling standards, especially when you're talking a big volume of standards across many industries. But this standard is referred to as F3275. So Audrey, will you just share a little bit about what this particular standard is?
Yeah, certainly. So as you said, the standard is known as ASTM F3275. So this is the standard guide for using a force tester to evaluate the performance of a brush part that is designed to clean the internal channel of a medical device. And that's a very long title, but that's actually the title of the standard. And as you'll see, if you look more into the ASTM standards, they all have very long names, but they're very descriptive and helpful for what you'll read about within that standard. So what this standard essentially is trying to, what it does is it gives us a prescribed way to test the brushes in order to objectively measure their ability to clean time and time again. It's this reproducible procedure to test the cleaning efficiency of the brush.
All right. So there's actually a way to measure the cleaning ability of a brush and do it objectively. That is really cool. So how would someone be able to measure the cleaning ability of a brush?
Well, that's a really great question. And I will say there's certainly no known way to measure the cleaning efficacy of a brush out in the field in someone's SPD department. We do this level of testing in the research and development lab here at Healthmark. But the ASTM standard says in order to measure the cleaning efficacy, you test the brush for compression and tension.
And that's where you come in with your job, right?
Yes, exactly. That's correct. So in order to measure compression and tension, we use a force tester apparatus in the lab. It's this device that allows us to replicate the same conditions for each brush that we test over and over again, same conditions, to measure the compression and tension of the brush. So the compression is measured when the brush is being pushed into the lumen, and the tension measurements are taken when the brush is being extracted out of the lumen. So in this particular case, for the standard F3275, we're testing channel cleaning brushes. These would be the type of brushes that SPD techs would use to clean the various devices that have lumens in them.
Excellent. So if I understand correctly, you're performing these tests to understand how much friction each brush is creating. And as we know, friction is really important when it comes to cleaning with a brush. We even do this in our daily lives, right? With hard to remove soils from our own dishes. We know we're going to apply more pressure when we need to generate more friction. But I remember talking to you about your work before, and this isn't the only thing you're measuring with our brushes, right?
No, you're exactly right. Friction is so important in measuring the cleaning efficacy of the brush. But the standard also provides a criteria for testing the soil removal capabilities of a channel brush. So F3275 has this second section outlining how we can do that in the lab. So it's just another one of those components that I test with all of our brushes that are designed for cleaning those lumen devices or instruments.
Excellent. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So you're testing for friction and soil removal. So then you should be able to understand how effective your brush design really is. So I'm a little bit unsure of how someone would be able to test a brush for soil removal. Can you just explain what that test sort of looks like?
Yeah, of course. So, well, we have to do a lot of measuring, just like we did with the first portion of the testing with the compression and the tension. We're going to be using the apparatus again, like we did with the compression and tension testing, but now we're going to be putting a sample into the apparatus and testing it that way with the brush and the apparatus. But we're going to be measuring the tube's weight before we soil it. And then again, the next day after the soil is now dried, we're going to weigh it again. And then we clean it with the apparatus and the brush that we're testing. And then we take the tube and we weigh it after it's been cleaned in the apparatus. So it's a little bit tricky to explain, but it's this just very multi-step procedure of weighing this sample, which is supposed to be kind of, part of the scope, if you will. We're trying to emulate what is this going to be looking like in, of course, just reproducing the real world to test the brushes. That's the whole point. So this is kind of that fun portion of the test where we get to kind of apply that thinking as well as, artificial test soil, applying that to the tubes for our testing. So after we get that weight, we calculate the difference, and then we can equate the amount of soil that's been removed by the brush, the apparatus, and everything, as I explained. We can equate that to or at least part of the brush's cleaning efficacy, as it also, relating in the compression and tension values.
So all that measurement allows you to calculate a percentage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that percentage, that's really cool. That's the cool part, I think, because I find it's amazing that we can have these kinds of objective measurements to test these cleaning capabilities of a brush. And so percentage-wise, talking about all those calculations that you made and coming up with these percentages. So what have you seen with our brushes? Like, what kind of percentage are we seeing of test soil removal are they accomplishing?
Yeah, wow. I agree with you there, Kevin. It's really interesting when you break it down that way, when you apply this concept of a statistical value of the soil being removed. But that's really what this is. And it is so remarkable to talk about it. But just for an example, I was testing one of our instrument tube brushes. And these are just one of our brushes that can be used to clean lumen items. The average soil removal for this brush was 99.3%.
Wow. Okay. So 99.3% sounds really, really good to me. But, a lot of times in order to find out if we're actually achieving a good result, we might be benchmarking against something else or even prior tests or whatever. So that being said, how do we know? Are we doing comparative tests of our brushes against other brushes that have the same specifications? Is that something that you're doing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we definitely are. And that's a big part of this, right? Is we do these comparative studies with our brushes, but also with other brushes, other manufacturers, other makes. But we don't have them lined up for every single brush and every single comparison yet. But we're working on it. And I have done a lot of research with those comparisons to other manufacturers of brushes. And so having that sort of, like you said, the benchmark to compare it to is really important. And that's definitely something that we're doing here at Healthmark.
All right, cool. So what have you been able to discover with your comparative studies with these brushes? Have you, noticed anything particularly useful?
Oh, yes. I think I have to laugh because I noticed so many different things because, when you have the product in your hand and you really get to look at it and try using it, you get to see things that, you wouldn't otherwise. So on a more general sense, I found that our brushes perform on par with, if not better than other competitor brushes. The differences that I've noted are the way that they're made, the density of the fibers. I found to be rather interesting. So through all of the testing I've done with, and I say density of the fibers merely by the width or the diameter of the individual fiber on the brush. But you find out those things and you can kind of, keep track of that and see how it relates to the whole brush, the product of the brush itself.
Well, that's actually really important because I'll just tell you from my own former experience and my former role, especially in the endoscopy world, we would often be led to believe by the OEM that their brushes were superior or better designed to clean their equipment, or that's the only one really meant to clean their equipment. So it really brings that to my mind, when we're discussing this. So would any of these studies that you do pertain to the endoscope cleaning world in particular?
Yeah, actually, it does. It definitely does. So in our testing procedure, we run brushes through stainless steel tubes, which, that represents your typical stainless steel instrument. But we also do these tests on other materials, like a Teflon tubing as well. Teflon tubing is the material that's used to make the channels inside of a typical flexible endoscope. And we have done some comparative studies with our brushes and endoscope OEM brushes.
Okay, so that's exactly what I was getting at. So are these studies available to see and read? Again, going back to my own experience, we were reluctant to use any brush that was not the OEM's recommended brush, in particular with those flexible endoscopes. So maybe information like this would help them understand that they aren't putting their patients at risk if they choose going with another brush, that sort of thing. Is that available to them?
Yeah, definitely. We do have those studies that are available to them. All they do is find the brushes on our website, and the studies are available in the supporting document section of the product.
Excellent. So would you say that we have similar studies for the more traditional block style brushes as well, for the external surfaces of all the other types of instruments that we do?
We have done some studies with those other brushes as well. I'm not sure as to which ones are available for online right now for the supporting documents. However, all of the studies are ongoing for the other brushes as well.
Wow, Audrey, that's great. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I unfortunately, the time just flies, and I think that we could talk so much longer about what it is you do and the stuff that you're finding out and discovering in the lab there. But I really appreciate you coming on, sharing with us what you do a little bit, talking to us a little bit about ASTM. And I just really appreciate what you do and just taking the time to educate our listeners for a little bit. Thank you.
Oh, okay, Kevin. Thank you so much. The pleasure's been all mine. Take care.
All right, just to recap this episode, I spoke with Audrey McDonald, Laboratory Technician here at Healthmark, and she shared with us a little bit about ASTM International and how they provide the standards for testing our cleaning brushes. She also shared with us how she is able to measure the friction and the soil removal capabilities of a channel brush. Unfortunately, we were only able to scratch the surface of the work that Audrey does here. I literally wrote down 6 additional questions while we were discussing this. So maybe at some point we'll have to do a part 2 of this down the road and invite Audrey back. If you listened along and had more questions like me, then please submit your questions to us at our email address, asktheeducator@hmark.com. I want to thank you all for listening, and please remember to subscribe to our podcast. Thank you. All opinions expressed on this show are those of the presenters. Before using any medical device, it is important to review the device manufacturer's instructions for use.